Hey everybody, welcome back to the Krita class. Today we're going to have a new video in our comic tutorial series, and we're going to talk about a new tool that Krita 5.3 has, which is the comic panels tool, which is right up here. If you look in our tool panel, it's next to the pen icon. It's called Comic Panel Editing Tool. So if you are familiar with Krita, you know that we want to do our comic panels on a vector layer. It's just going to be much easier, and we can go back and edit that if we want. So if you aren't new to Krita, then you need to make sure that anytime you use this tool, you have to use the vector layer. If you click on it and you go to your tool options, it will also remind you that the only way to get this tool to work is if you're using a vector layer. So a vector layer allows you basically to just make your shapes and go back and edit it later with points and things like that, versus a rasterized or a paint layer, which you don't really get to do that. I mean, you can technically warp it if you want, but it's not the same. So we're gonna go to layer, to the plus icon, hit the arrow and add vector layer. Perfect. So before I do anything else, I want to make sure my color is black. So I'm just gonna move my little color icon to black. And what I'm gonna do first is just make a basic shape with the square icon, or the square shape tool. And make sure I don't have a fill. I just want the outline. I'm gonna click and drag. Perfect. Now I do want to make sure my corners are nice and sharp. So I'm gonna go back to my tool options, click on this solid line, go to the thickness, and make sure everything is at nice sharp point. Perfect. I'm not gonna worry about placement like to make it perfect right now. We're just gonna pretend that this is perfect on the comic page. Now I'm going to go back to my comic panel editing tool, and now that we're on the vector layer and we have our shape, we can see in the tool options we have options. So we have two icons up here. This one is to break up this big shape and make as many panels as we need, and this one is to merge them back together. We also have a unit of width, so if you want to use millimeters, we can do millimeters. If you want to use pixels, we can use pixels. We can change the gap of the gutter, which is the space in between each panel. And we can choose other options for the gutter here as well. We're going to stay with the thick gap for now. And I'm just going to click and drag. If you want this to be perfectly straight, just hit the shift key. I'm going to let go, and voila, I now have two panels. If I do this again on the diagonal, there's three panels. And if I want to separate these, I have four panels, and if I wanted to, I could just go and delete this one. And now I have my panels. Now this option here merges the, any panels together. So if I wanted these two panels to be one panel, I click and I drag, and now they're merged. Do the same for these, and the same for these. And just keep merging. And now it's back to one big panel. Alright, so the thin gap, if we want something to be thinner, we can have this to be obviously a smaller gap than what we have here. I'm just going to say, I'll say 15. Maybe I want these panels to be close together, not too distant. I can do that. You can see it's like they're separate panels for sure. It's just the gap is so thin, we don't really notice it. So I'm actually going to redo that and make it a little bit bigger. I think 25 is fine. So there. Now I have a thinner gap between the two panels, or the gutter. We can do special. Now these can be modified. This is just for your personal reference and usage. That way, if you always want a specific consistent gutter size, you have that. And then if you want to make some custom options without having to constantly change these two, you can do that with the special. So maybe for some reason you want these panels to have a really giant gap, you can say the special gap is always going to be for this specific situation. Maybe you're, let's see, you have a really intense scene and you just really need as many panels as you want, but you want it to be dynamic, so you have all these really thick gaps between it. and you have like maybe dialogue going through, who knows? There's so many ways you can do that. Or use that thicker panel or gutter or whatever. It's just totally up to how you want to lay out your pages. So if we go to automatic, let me put this back to one panel. I'm just going to click and drag. And it's just going to have a nice consistent width between everything. So if you see, I have my vertical and my horizontal. In the settings, the horizontal is thick, the vertical is thin, and the diagonal, I'm going to leave it thin, so that's going to be this here. So what it's doing is it's looking at my settings here, so the horizontal thick will always be at 50. The vertical thin will be at 25, which we saw right here. And the diagonal is also thin, so it matches the vertical. However, if I put that to special, it's now at that nice giant margin or gap size, the 150 pixels. So that's pretty nice. So if you wanted to make it automatic where these settings will always be there, so whenever you're doing your horizontal separation, it will always be, let me undo that, sorry. It will always be the same thickness no matter what. So you don't have to worry about switching between these manually. You always have that option. Now if you do vertical or horizontal, you can see that this is thin, but if I move it ever so slightly, that's when it changes to special. If you move it back, it's slightly at a diagonal, just enough to keep that, that thinness. So it looks like we have a little bit of wiggle room to keep it diagonal, but not go too extreme, otherwise we'll trigger the special gap size. Same with horizontal. I have a little bit of wiggle room to make it diagonal, but once it gets to a certain point, then it changes. So if you want to change that, we can go to the angle. Let's say it changes after, we'll just say 20 degrees. If you want this to be an accurate number, right click and then type it in. So now if we click and drag, you can see that it's staying the 25 pixels that we changed for, or that we set for the thin gap under vertical. But if we go past that 20 degrees, it now turns into a special gap size. Same with the horizontal. So you can have a lot of flexibility where you can basically make whatever you want and keep it consistent throughout all of your pages. Now there's no right or wrong way to do layouts. I've seen simple layouts, I've seen super complex layouts. I definitely recommend checking out how other people make their layouts in terms of like Western versus Eastern comic, like manga versus Western American comics. Everyone does something a little bit different, and there's some crazy options for your panels. Definitely read a lot of comics because then you can start seeing the differences and what becomes visually interesting. Because that's the whole point. We want the comic panels to make our story flow, but not be so distracting it pulls us away from the story, but it still pulls us in and is visually interesting so we stay on the page and want to keep reading. Now I do have a panel here that you can see that is split. Oh, let me actually do it this way. That's split this way, right? Obviously I don't want it that thick, but that's okay. What I would have to do is I would have to go in to my shape selector tool and add an extra points. Use my mouse for this. And I would still have to break at the point and modify this just a little bit so the character would be coming through the panels. So you still have to do that work, but that's totally acceptable because the whole process has been sped up considerably. I no longer have to split the panel. I no longer have to manually make the shape with the vector tool here. This one, like before, I would have to, let me just make a new layer to show you. I'd have to like manually do this, and then I have to make sure all the panels I made lined up, and it was just not fun. And now we don't have to do that anymore. We can just make one big square shape and then use this tool to divide it up. And that's it. Life is great. So that's really it for this video. So your homework, because this is a short video, I'd really just go back to some comic pages and test out this tool by redoing the panels, or if you're still working on a new page for your comic and you want to make something brand new, use this tool to kind of lay out the panels and make your life easier. This video was short because it's so easy, and I highly recommend using this if you're going to be making comics in Krita. If you'd like to join my Discord and get some real-time help with Krita or just share what you're creating, the link to the Discord is in the description below. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.